Hi, this is a tutorial for taking a photographed blank object and turning it into a mock-up in Photoshop. Let me start by opening up a fresh document, but this is kind of what we're aiming for at the end here. The first step I always do is I'm going to duplicate my layer because I want to make sure that I can always work backwards and get back any information later that I need. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a smart object. To do that, I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to click on my screen so that I can type in the dimensions of my blank object. So in this case, this cover closed is a 5.5 by 8.5 inch book. So I'm going to type in my units as well, just to make sure that I am using the right units and it's not converting it to something else. I do suggest using like a big bright color so that you can always distinguish your layer while you're working on it. And then the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my rectangle, and I am going to convert to smart object. And what that's going to do is going to create another file basically nested within the Photoshop file that lets us import our art or our future cover of this book into here to visualize it here. So now that this is a smart object, whatever we do to it, this smart object will always be our 5.5 by 8.5 rectangle, and that's going to help match up our art without having to stretch it later. Okay, so I'm going to just transform this rectangle using Command T or Edit Transform, and whatever I do to it, to scale it, I'm going to make sure I have the Shift key pressed so that I constrain my proportions. I'm just going to scale that up so that it matches closer. At this stage, I'm going to lower the opacity so that I can see the blank object behind my smart object. And I'm going to start fine-tuning this so that it matches my object. I've already put a grid in advance on this object when I printed it out so that I could match up my lines digitally and match the realism of the bends and the folds in this book cover. And to do that, we are going to use a warp mesh. If you have like a really angled photograph, then you might actually want to start with the transform distort feature. And just take those corners and line them up best you can with your corners. But since I have a really straight on look here, I'm just going to skip right to my transform warp. And then so this default is a 3x3 grid. The grid that I printed was a 3x4 because I was trying to get more square sections. I didn't really have a reason. I thought the default grid was 3x4, so that's what I printed, but it's not a problem because I can go up here into my options, and I can under grid choose custom, and then I can type in 3x4. This is in here because it's the last time I used it, that's what I used. And then hit OK, and it'll change that warp mesh grid to be a 3x4. And this means that these nodes are going to line up better with my printed grid on my blank zine mockup here. So from here, I'm just going to take my corner nodes and match them up with my corners, and I'm going to move these nodes to match up where these grid lines cross, or where the lines end on the edge of the page. And then while I'm here, I'm also going to be moving these arms to match the curvature of the book to give it some three-dimensionality. And that also goes for these lines here. I like to move the nodes first, at least in the relative area, so that I have a good start, and then I can use those arms to match the curves here a little bit. And that is going to warp our art and make it look more realistic as to matching the perspective of this object that the art is going to be over top of. And you'll notice that there's leaves and stuff covering this, and that there's also more pages because this is a three-dimensional object. But what we want is to the warp mesh and the smart object that we're meshing, we want it to be the cover. So wherever the cover actually is in this photo, including behind the leaves, and not including the other pages of the book, that's what we're looking to line it up with. So I'm just gonna do that. And with this photo, I'm gonna have to kind of use my best estimate because I have photographed it where I can't see all my grid lines. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're photographing. If you have like a wonky angle and you're not seeing all of your grids, then you're going to be playing a little bit of a guessing game. But for the most part, I have a lot of information to go off of here. So I'm not worried that it's going to look that bad. Okay, then I'm going to hit enter once I'm happy, and I can always go back and change this later. Like, for example, if I feel like I need to include these little bumps here, then I can just make sure my rectangle here is selected and go back to warp, and it's going to have remembered those sections. So I can bump this out like a little bit and try and grab some more of that. Okay, that is my smart object created. Now, I want to make it so that these leaves are appearing in front of my smart object. There's a couple ways to do that. You could copy the leaves and paste them as their own layer in front, but to minimize just the amount of layers I have, because I'm going to keep working and adding layers, I'm going to just mask them out of my smart object layer. So to do that, what I like to do, there's definitely different ways to do this, but what I like to do is first create my mask and then go in and paint out the things that I want to paint out. So to mask something, you have to make sure that you're using like true black and true white, which you can make sure you're doing by using this little button above the color, foreground color and background color. And then to hide something in a mask, you want black as your foreground color. And then I'm going to make sure my brush is pretty hard. I know that there's a little bit of fuzziness around these guys because of the depth of field of this photograph. So I'm actually going to leave it at like 90% hardness. And then I'm just going to zoom in and make sure that I've selected my actual mask here, the white rectangle. And then I'm just going to use my brush to brush and paint away the leaves to mask them. And the thing about the mask that's great is that this information is still there. So if I go overboard, I can just switch my foreground layer to white and I can bring that information back. So I will do this and then we will go on to the next step. Okay, so I've masked out those leaves from my rectangle smart object. At this stage, because it will mess me up later, I'm going to make sure my opacity for this layer is back at 100%. And then I'm going to hide it by clicking the eyeball and hiding it. The next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to want to isolate the book or my object from its background, because I'm going to use that blank white surface to indicate to my smart object layer what the shadows and highlights look like. Using blending modes later on. So I'm going to do that by masking this background copy layer so that it's just the book. So I'm going to create another mask. And to do that, I'm going to use the polygon lasso tool and go around and select my book. So I'm going to do that. And then I'll be back and move on to the next step. Okay, so I've selected my book here using my preferred method, and I've made sure that I'm not including my leaves and I am including my extra pages there. And then to create a mask, I'm going to go over to my layers panel. Right in the bottom here, there's a rectangle with a circle cut out of it, and I'm going to click that, and it's going to hide everything that wasn't selected. That's going to be just our book layer, and I'm going to rename it something like just book so that I am friendly to myself in the future. Similarly, I could rename this cover because that's what it's going to be. If this was like a mock-up that I was making to share with somebody, I might even label it like replace me, because this is the object, the smart object that is going to allow us to replace that art to make the mock-up. Okay, so I have that, and I'm going to turn the background layer back on just so I can see my whole image. Now I want to get rid of those grid lines because I've used them. They're done. Their purpose is over, and I don't want them to show up in those lighting layers, in the future lighting layers I'm going to create from this. So, and because I have my background copy still here, I'm not worried about like altering my image because I can always work backwards from that. So I'm going to choose this layer thumbnail here of my just book layer, and I'm going to use my preferred method to get rid of the grid lines. There's definitely multiple ways to do this in Photoshop, but I find that for this, patch tool works really well. So I'm going to choose my patch tool, and then I'm just going to come in here and try to make a selection really close to these lines, and then just click that selection and move it over just a little bit, and it's going to get rid of the line and try to keep kind of a similar lighting information. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit Command D or Control D to deselect that selection. And you can do this too if there's like a speck. I know that you might not be able to see it. If you have like some dots or anything that you also want to clean up, you can use that same tool for that. So I might clean up this area up here because it's got smooch on it. One thing that's helpful, especially at the edges, if I like pull this away, it doesn't necessarily know what to do with that edge. So I'm going to pull it across so that it's kind of matching up an area that's really similar to, of course it's not liking that. I'm trying to match it up with an area that's very similar. And if I don't feel like I can do that, I might just break it down into some smaller areas. I lost my patch tool. And oftentimes along edges, I find that the shift key helps. You can even overdo it and kind of move it. I'm just moving it in such a way that these lines appear in here in the same way that I want. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to clean up the grids and maybe some other specks and dust that I want to clean up. And then this will be ready for the next step. Okay, so now I've got my gridless, spotless object, which is great. I'm going to create 3 layers based off of this that I'm going to turn into our lighting layers. So to do that, I want to copy the pixels just of the book, but we already have them selected here in our mask. So I'm going to hit Command and then or Control on PC and click on the mask. And that's going to reselect the mask selection that I created earlier. And then making sure that this left side is highlighted, I'm going to copy to my clipboard with Command C or Control C. And then importantly, I'm going to paste in place. So I can just do that by doing File, Edit, Paste Special, Paste in Place, or I can hit Command or Control Shift V and it will paste it exactly in the same location. But you can see down here that I have a new layer. And I want 3 of those. So now that I have one, I'm going to click it and then I'm just going to hit Command J, Command or Control J twice and get 2 more layers. And those also will be in the same exact location, which is important because we don't want things shifting around. Things will get funky if we do that. So I'm going to call these my lighting layers because they're informing the lighting of my mockup here. And I want them on top of my smart object layer. So I'm going to move my smart object layer down. We can turn it back on, and it might also be helpful at this stage to put in a real example. So as you're playing with the lighting, you have something that you are looking at that's not just a blank color, to see if the colors and lighting looks realistic. So I'm going to open up my Smart Object by double clicking on that thumbnail there. And I'm just going to drag in, I have a screenshot here of a cover for a zine that I'm working on. And this, like, you know, screenshot may not be perfect, but that's okay because I'm just using it to test things out. Okay, so it's underneath all these lighting layers, so you can't see it right now. But we're going to change them and their blend modes a little bit to start out, and that will give us a good base for applying that lighting from the real photo onto our Smart Object. So I'm going to rename this bottom layer Shadows, and then this middle layer Midtones, and the top layer Highlights. I'm going to set my shadows to darken blending mode up here in my little drop down menu. And I'm going to change the opacity to something like 40% just to start with. Then for my midtones, I'm going to set this one to soft light. Full transparency, I learned this from another tutorial, which I'll link if I can find it again. So I don't necessarily have I don't know that I can always tell you why we are doing what we're doing. Just because I'm not a super expert in things, but I encourage you to move sliders around, play with blending modes, especially the midtones. Sometimes the midtones, the soft light doesn't do it depending on your picture. So feel free to mess around with that. And I'm going to set this to 25% opacity for now. And then our highlights we're going to set to screen, and that's going to be really low, so something like 5% to start. Okay, so the magic is happening. We're seeing our art on our book, and it's already looking pretty good. A few things that I like to do, depending on the way I edited my photo, my book or my blank object might be bringing some color in that I don't want it to. So we can add an adjustment layer to mess with that. So I'll have my shadows layer selected. Down at the bottom of the layers panel, there's a circle that's split in half at an angle, and that is going to open up this menu that lets us add different adjustment layers, and I'm going to choose hue saturation, and then I'm just going to right click on that layer and create clipping mask so that it's clipped to my shadows layer. And I'm going to do that for all three of them. Just like that. Okay, so I think it helps as a starting place with colors if the mockup is not influencing the colors of my art. So I'm going to drop that saturation to -100. And I might also brighten, especially on like the highlights layer, I might brighten the lightness just a little bit. But this just depends on your photograph and sort of situation. Again, move sliders around. You can always undo things. Okay, so that's a hue saturation layer. The other adjustment layer that I want on all of these is going to be a levels layer. So I'm going to do the same thing with the circle cut in half, and I'm going to add a levels to each of these. And if you already have everything clipped, they should come in as clipped to their lighting layers below. But if not, make sure that there's this little arrow that is pointing down to make it a clipping mask. So that means it's only affecting this layer, which is why we have it just the pixels that we want here on our lighting layer, so that we know we're not affecting this background image with our adjustment layers here. Okay, back to me not necessarily knowing like why certain things work, but we're going to play with our output levels a little bit and these sliders here until we get the desired effect. So with shadows, I want to bring the light down a little so it doesn't look so pure white. And I want to move the baseline of our shadows up a little bit so that we get some more of those. I'm looking especially at like this shadow cast by this leaf. I want to be able to see that still. And then the other thing we can play with is the opacity of our actual shadows layer. It's not the levels that I was just messing with, but the actual shadows layer. We can definitely like up the opacity of that if you feel like you want more. If it's too bright or if it's too dark, you can definitely play with that. So I actually think I had it a little high, so I'm going to set it to like 35, 36. All right. I'm going to jump to the highlights first and look at the levels there. Bringing in any highlights. Again, we're just moving sliders, folks. We're seeing what looks good. Do we need more highlights? Honestly, it's looking pretty good. So I'm not mad about it as is. Let's look at those midtones. Midtones is often where I find like the color is getting messed with. And I think that has to do with messing with the blend modes more than it does messing with these. I'm going to move this middle slider way up so that I can get some of these shadows to look good. Okay, I'm pleased with that. But we can, just as an example, like you can go through these and kind of see like how we have it set to only 25%. So the effects, like if I go to linear light, I'm getting a lot more just contrast in the lighting, and maybe that to me looks more realistic to the photo, or maybe it even highlights if I've taken the photo well and I really wanted to like highlight something with a light beam, then maybe I want some more light. So I feel like the light or the color dodge, some of those layers are good for those mid-tone layers. All right, so I'm pleased with that. That can be your last step. One thing that I like to do, because I like to be able to reuse these, is just to group all of my lighting layers into a folder that I can call lighting. And that way when I open this file, I can see my cover layer right away down here. Because this is the thing that I'm going to be opening up and replacing, to use this as a mock-up. And that is how to take a blank photo of an object and turn it into a mock-up for reuse. This can be really useful for visualizing something that doesn't actually exist in print yet, potentially for like crowdfunding if you want to share it with people and show them what you think it'll look like. It can be a really fun way to do kind of a custom photo shoot for things without having the book in hand, or potentially like if I was taking this to the woods on a wet day without risking photographing a nicer copy of something, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of use cases for this sort of thing, but I find that it's easy to just carry my blank zine around with me if I'm like at a museum and maybe get some shots of something for a mock-up later on. Or I can have something more specific in mind, like this, and go to the woods and edit my photos with a tone and a project in mind. So I hope this helps. There's going to be more detail in an article that I will link to this video and vice versa, about how to photograph things, some tips on that, and also like how I print out different options for actually making your mock-ups, the blank object that you're photographing. So keep an eye out for that, and let me know if you understand blend modes better than me and you want to tell me how to do this more efficiently. Feel free to let me know, that sort of thing. All right. Thank you. Bye.